Chapter 1. Stop trying to impress. What if the reason you struggle to talk to people isn't because you don't know what to say, but because you're thinking too much about yourself? You meet someone new, and your mind immediately starts asking, do I sound confident? Do they like me? What should I say next? And while you're thinking about yourself, you're not really listening to the person in front of you. Here's the first change I want you to make. Stop trying to impress people. Start trying to understand them. Think about someone you genuinely enjoy talking to. Why do you enjoy talking to them? Maybe they listen. Maybe they remember small things you told them. Maybe they don't interrupt you. Maybe they make you feel comfortable enough to be yourself. Notice something. They don't necessarily talk the most. They simply make you feel heard. So the next time you're talking to someone, don't enter the conversation thinking, how can I make this person like me? Instead, think, what can I learn about this person? Ask a simple question. Listen to the answer. Notice one detail. Then ask about that detail. For example, if someone says, I started learning photography, don't just say, that's cool. Ask, what made you want to learn photography? Now you're not forcing a conversation. You're following their story. And this is where your communication begins to change. Because people don't always remember the smartest thing you said. They remember how they felt when they were around you. So here's your challenge. In your next conversation, talk less about proving yourself and more about understanding the other person. You don't need to become more interesting. You need to become more interested. And once you understand that, talking to people becomes much easier. Chapter 2. The first 10 seconds, imagine you see someone you want to talk to. You have the perfect opportunity, but you hesitate. 5 seconds pass, then 10. Then your brain starts creating excuses. Maybe they're busy. Maybe I should wait. Maybe tomorrow. And the moment disappears. Here's the truth. The hardest part of conversation is often the first few seconds. Once you start talking, your brain has something real to work with. So don't wait for confidence. Action creates confidence. When a situation is appropriate, simply start. Hey, how's your day going? Or, hi, I don't think we've met before. I'm Ahmed. That's enough. You don't need a clever line. You don't need to sound impressive. Your goal isn't to create an amazing conversation in the first sentence. Your goal is simply to open the door. Then listen carefully to their answer. If they say, I'm good, I just finished work, don't immediately search for another random topic. Use what they gave you. Oh, what kind of work do you do? Now, the conversation has somewhere to go. And here's something important. If someone doesn't seem interested in talking, don't take it personally. They may be tired. They may be distracted. They may simply not want to talk. Respect that and move on. Your success isn't measured by whether every person likes you. It's measured by whether you had the courage to take the first step. So here's your challenge. The next time you have a natural opportunity to talk to someone, don't spend 30 seconds arguing with yourself. Smile, say hello, and let the conversation begin. Because confidence isn't something you wait to feel. It's something you build every time you act despite the fear. Chapter 3. The skill most people never learn. What if I told you that one of the fastest ways to become better at conversation is to stop trying to think of what to say? Sounds strange, right? But think about it. When someone is talking to you, are you actually listening? Or are you secretly preparing your next sentence? You're thinking, what should I say? What story can I tell? How can I sound interesting? And while you're doing that, you're missing what the other person is actually telling you. That's why the most powerful communication skill isn't speaking. It's listening. Real listening means giving someone your attention. Don't interrupt them. Don't immediately turn their story into your story. Don't look at your phone. Listen for the details. Imagine someone says, I've been working on a business for the last year, but it's been really difficult. You could say, oh, nice, and move on. Or you could say, what has been the hardest part? Now you've shown genuine interest. Maybe they tell you about their struggles. Maybe they tell you what they've learned. Maybe they tell you about their goals. And suddenly, you have a real conversation. Here's the transformation. Stop asking yourself, what should I say next? Start asking, what is this person really saying? That one change can completely transform the way you communicate. And here's your challenge. In your next conversation, don't try to be the most interesting person. Try to be the best listener. Let the other person finish. Remember one detail. Ask about it. Because when people feel genuinely heard, They don't just enjoy the conversation. They remember the person who listened. Chapter 4. How to never run out of things to say. Have you ever been talking to someone and suddenly your mind goes completely blank? You think, what do I say now? The silence feels uncomfortable, so you panic. But here's the secret. You don't need hundreds of conversation topics. You need to learn how to follow the topic that's already in front of you. Imagine someone tells you, I went to Kenya last month. Instead of jumping to a completely different subject, ask, what was your favorite part? They answer, Nairobi. I love the energy there. Now you have another question. What did you like most about Nairobi? They might tell you about the food, the people, or something funny that happened. And suddenly, you've been talking for several minutes. You didn't prepare any of those questions. You simply listened to the previous answer. Think of a conversation like a path. You don't need to know where the path ends. You only need to notice the next step. And here's another important rule. Don't turn the conversation into an interrogation. If you ask 10 questions without sharing anything, it can feel like an interview. Instead, ask, listen, respond, share. For example, what kind of movies do you like? They say, action movies. You could say, same. I watched one recently that was crazy. Then ask, what was the last action movie you really enjoyed? Now, both of you are participating. So the next time your mind goes blank, don't panic. Don't search your brain for a completely new topic. Listen to the last thing they said. Find one interesting detail and follow it. Because the best conversationalists don't always have more things to say. They simply notice more. Chapter 5. Make people feel heard. Imagine you're telling someone about something important to you. You're excited. You're explaining what happened. But while you're talking, they keep checking their phone. They interrupt you, or they immediately change the subject to themselves. How does that make you feel? Probably like you don't really matter. Now imagine the opposite. Someone looks at you, listens carefully, lets you finish, then remembers something you said. That feels completely different. And this gives us one of the most powerful lessons in communication. People want to feel heard. You don't need to agree with everything someone says. You don't even need to have the same interests. You simply need to show that you're paying attention. For example, someone tells you, my brother is starting university next month. You could forget it immediately. Or the next time you see them, you could ask, how is your brother doing? Did he start university? That's a tiny question, but it sends a huge message. I remembered what mattered to you. And people notice that. So stop listening only for information. Listen for what matters to the person. What are they excited about? What are they worried about? What are they working toward? What makes them happy? Then remember those details. Because being a great communicator isn't about having the perfect words. Sometimes it's simply about giving someone your full attention. So here's your challenge. The next time someone talks to you, put your phone away. Don't interrupt. Don't prepare your response while they're speaking. Just listen. And before the conversation ends, remember one thing they told you. Then use it later. Because people may forget your exact words, but they rarely forget the person who made them feel like they mattered. Chapter 6. The power of your voice. You can say the right words and still make the wrong impression. Why? Because communication isn't only about what you say. It's also about how you say it. Imagine two people saying, nice to meet you. The first person speaks extremely fast, looks nervous, and barely makes eye contact. The second speaks calmly, looks at you naturally, and sounds relaxed. Same words, completely different feeling. That's why your voice matters. When you're nervous, you may speak too quickly. You may make your sentences shorter. You may sound uncertain even when you know exactly what you're talking about. So here's a simple change. Slow down. You don't need to speak extremely slowly. Just give your words space. Pause when you need to think. Take a breath. Finish your sentence. This does two things. First, it makes you easier to understand. Second, it gives your brain more time to think. And there's another important point. Don't try to create a fake, confident voice. You don't need a deeper voice. You don't need to sound like a motivational speaker. Your natural voice is enough. Confidence comes from being comfortable with your own voice. Think about someone you trust. They probably don't speak perfectly. They don't choose perfect words every time, but they sound comfortable being themselves. That's what you should aim for. So before your next important conversation, take one slow breath. Relax your shoulders. Slow your speech slightly. And remember, you don't need to sound impressive. You need to sound like yourself. Because when you stop trying to perform, your voice becomes more natural. And natural communication is far more powerful than a perfect performance. Chapter 7. The Power of Questions. What if one simple question could completely change a conversation? Most people ask questions to get information, but great communicators ask questions to understand people. Imagine someone tells you, "I've always wanted to start my own business." You could simply say, "That's cool," and move on. Or you could ask, "What made you want to start one?" Now you've opened a door. Maybe they tell you about a dream they've had for years. Maybe they tell you about a problem they want to solve. Maybe they explain what they're afraid of. One good question can reveal an entire story. But there's a secret. Don't ask questions just to keep the conversation alive. Ask questions because you genuinely want to know the answer. And listen carefully. If they say, "I started because I wanted more freedom," don't immediately jump to another question. You could say, "What would more freedom look like for you?" Now you're going deeper. You're not just talking about business anymore. You're talking about what they actually want from life. That's where meaningful conversations begin. But remember the balance. If you ask question after question without sharing anything yourself, the conversation can feel like an interview. So use this simple rhythm. Ask, listen, respond, share, then ask again. And here's your challenge. The next time someone tells you something interesting, don't immediately talk about yourself. Ask one more question. You might discover a story you would have completely missed. Because a good question doesn't just keep a conversation going. It shows someone that you're genuinely interested in who they are. Chapter 8. Don't be afraid of silence. There is a moment in almost every conversation that people are afraid of. Silence. You say something. They respond. Then, nothing. 2 seconds pass. And suddenly your brain says, "This is awkward." So you start talking. Anything. You change the subject. You make a random joke. You say something you didn't even mean to say. But here's the truth. Silence isn't the enemy. Your fear of silence is. A short pause doesn't mean the conversation is failing. Sometimes people are simply thinking. Sometimes they're choosing their words. Sometimes they're comfortable enough that they don't need to fill every second with noise. Think about people who know each other really well. Do they panic every time there's silence? No, because they're comfortable. And that's what you should learn. When a pause happens, breathe. Don't immediately reach for your phone. Don't assume you've done something wrong. Give the other person a moment. And if you want to continue, simply return to something they mentioned earlier. For example, you mentioned that you were learning photography. How's that going? Suddenly, the conversation has a direction again. But there's an even deeper lesson here. You don't have to entertain people every second. You don't have to constantly prove that you're interesting. You're allowed to pause. You're allowed to think. You're allowed to be quiet. Real confidence isn't the ability to talk nonstop. Real confidence is being comfortable even when you don't have anything to say. So the next time silence appears, don't run from it. Take a breath. Stay present. And remember, a quiet moment isn't a failure. Sometimes it's simply a moment. Chapter 9. Stop trying to win every conversation. Have you ever told someone something exciting, and they immediately tried to prove they had done something better? You say, "I finally started my own project." They say, "That's nothing. I've been doing something similar for years." You share an achievement. They share a bigger achievement. You tell a story. They tell an even bigger story. Without realizing it, the conversation has become a competition. And here's the problem. People don't want every conversation to be a competition. They want to feel understood. So when someone tells you something they're proud of, don't immediately compare yourself to them. Let them have their moment. If they say, "I finally reached my goal," instead of saying, "I did something similar," try. "That's amazing. What was the hardest part?" Now you're encouraging them to tell you more. And when someone tells you about a problem, don't immediately try to prove that your problem was worse. Listen. When someone has a different opinion, don't immediately attack it. Ask, "What makes you see it that way?" You don't have to agree. You don't even have to change your opinion. You can simply understand theirs. Because communication isn't about winning. It's about connecting. And here's the challenge. The next time you're having a conversation, notice how often you feel the urge to say, "Me too. I did that too. I know more about that. I've had it worse." When you notice that urge, pause. Instead, ask one question about their experience. You might discover that you don't need to compete for attention, because when you give people space to shine, they'll often remember you as the person who genuinely appreciated them. Chapter 10. The person people remember. You've reached the final chapter. And everything we've discussed comes down to one question. What do people feel when they're around you? Not what did you say? Not how impressive did you sound? But how did they feel? Because people may forget your exact words. They may forget the joke you told. They may even forget where they first met you. But they often remember the feeling you created. Did you make them feel ignored, or heard, judged, or accepted, unimportant, or valued? That's the real power of communication. You don't need to become a completely different person. You don't need to become the loudest person in the room. You don't need to have an answer for everything. You simply need to practice the skills we've talked about. Stop trying so hard to impress. Start becoming genuinely interested. Listen instead of waiting for your turn to speak. Ask better questions. Follow the details people give you. Give them your attention. Don't panic when silence appears. Don't turn every conversation into a competition. And most importantly, be real. Because the goal isn't to manipulate people into liking you. The goal is to become someone who makes others feel comfortable being themselves. So here's the challenge I want you to take with you. Tomorrow, have one conversation differently. Put your phone away. Look at the person. Listen carefully. Ask one genuine question. Remember one detail. And don't worry about being impressive. Just be present. Do that again the next day. And again. Because communication isn't changed by watching one video. It's changed by practicing one small behavior repeatedly. And eventually, something happens. You stop thinking about techniques. You stop worrying about every word. You stop asking yourself whether people like you. You simply listen. You speak. You connect. And you become the kind of person people feel good talking to. That is the real goal. Not to become the person everyone notices, but to become the person people remember for the right reason. I felt like I could be myself around them.